The email arrived at 8:43 a.m. sharp, right when the office was still waking up. I remember the faint hum of the espresso machine in the break room, the faint smell of paper and ink that clung to the printers, the muffled buzz of phones vibrating on desks. Normal, completely ordinary, until that message blinked into existence on my screen. Effective immediately, your position as Chief Creative Officer has been eliminated as part of restructuring. Please coordinate with HR for transition procedures. I read it once, then twice. And then I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle like ashes. That was it. 10 years reduced to 2 flat sentences. 10 years of sleepless nights, breakthrough campaigns, battles fought with competitors, ideas scribbled on whiteboards until dawn, pitches that won us investors and made our name echo across the industry. 2 sentences, nothing more. For a long moment, I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't forward the email to anyone. Instead, I just closed the laptop carefully, the way you might close the lid on a coffin. Outside my glass wall, the office went on as if nothing had happened. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, people balancing cups of coffee as they hustled down the hallway. The machinery of Artemis Biotech kept turning, blind to the fact that someone had just been erased. Then I saw him, Adrian Locke, our brand new CEO. 2 months into his reign and already reshaping the company like clay in his hands. He strode down the corridor with the confidence of a man who thought the building belonged to him. His suit was dark navy, perfectly fitted. His shoes clicked against the polished floor in a rhythm that demanded attention. His hair, steel gray but still thick, was styled with just enough artifice to look effortless. He passed by my office without slowing down, without even flicking his eyes in my direction. To him, I was already gone, a ghost that no longer registered in his kingdom. I sat there for a moment, listening to the silence inside my office. It felt heavier now, thick enough to choke. My chest rose and fell with measured calm. I knew what everyone else expected of me. The frantic phone calls, the tearful goodbyes, the cardboard box packed with personal things carried out under the pitying gaze of my colleagues. But I had no intention of playing that role. Instead, I stood, smoothed my skirt, straightened my blazer, and walked out into the corridor like nothing had happened. Heads lifted, eyes darted toward me, then back to screens. Nobody said a word, but whispers travel fast in places like this. They already knew, and they already knew better than to acknowledge it. Sympathy had become a dangerous currency here. Show too much and you might be next on the chopping block. A junior associate nearly bumped into me as I passed. She muttered a quick apology and ducked her head, as if afraid that even brushing against me might taint her career. I smiled at her anyway. If Adrian thought this was the end of me, he was badly mistaken. What he did not realize was that ghosts, once created, have a way of haunting the living. The weekend began earlier than expected. My inbox filled with cautious messages from colleagues. I am so sorry to hear the news. Wishing you all the best in your next chapter. Every one of them carried the same sterile tone, as if written from a template. No warmth, no honesty, just safe phrases designed to express acknowledgement without getting involved. I replied to each of them with equal politeness. Thank you for your kindness. I am sure this will lead to new opportunities. What they didn't know was that the new opportunities I referred to were not outside Artemis Biotech. They were right here, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. By noon, 17 of those messages had piled up. By evening, the number doubled. I scrolled through them with a kind of detached amusement. People thought they were writing to console me. In truth, they were writing their own confessions of fear. Friday night, I sat in my apartment overlooking the city. Lights glittered like broken glass across the skyline. The sound of traffic below rose and fell like the tide. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened a leather-bound journal. The pages smelled faintly of dust and ink, worn smooth by years of use. It was a gift from my grandmother, who built her fortune in an era when women weren't even allowed credit cards in their own name. Her handwriting filled the first page, delicate but unwavering. Power isn't about what you show, darling. It's about what you hold in reserve. I traced the letters with my finger and smiled. Adrian thought he had destroyed me with a single email. What he didn't know was that I had been holding something in reserve for years, something that would turn his carefully orchestrated takeover into ashes. I lifted my glass toward the city and whispered, "Game on." Monday morning would bring an emergency board meeting. Adrian had scheduled it himself, confident that the board would approve his restructuring plan. He had no idea that by the time item 7 appeared on the agenda, his career would already be over. Because you see, I was not just another executive clinging to a title. 7 years ago, when Artemis Biotech hovered on the brink of collapse, I had quietly funneled millions through a web of shell companies and trusts. On paper, the rescue came from an anonymous investment group. In reality, it came from me. That was the secret I had carried in silence all these years, and that was the secret that would bring Adrian Locke to his knees. Saturday morning arrived crisp and bright, the kind of autumn day that begged for long walks in the park and coffee on sunlit terraces. But I wasn't interested in any of that. My world had shifted. I spread folders across my dining table, each one filled with the breadcrumbs I had been collecting for months. Emails, meeting transcripts, notes scribbled during late-night calls. At first, they had seemed like isolated incidents, comments Adrian made, decisions he forced through, protocols he ignored. But now, when I laid them out side by side, a pattern emerged with brutal clarity. He had a playbook, and I had seen this playbook before. Adrian Locke was not an innovator. He was a predator in a tailored suit. His strategy was always the same: arrive with charm, promise transformation, identify threats, eliminate them, then strip the company for parts and sell it to the highest bidder. I pulled up public records from his previous positions: Medicanova, Heliothura, Biosinex. At each one, he lasted no more than 3 years. Each time, the story repeated: glowing press releases at first, then quiet settlements, sealed lawsuits, vanishing female executives. The pattern was undeniable, and now he had brought it here to Artemis Biotech. By afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. The words were short, sharp, and carried the weight of desperation. "Can we meet? Not at the office. Somewhere private." It was signed, I knew who it was immediately. Sophia Grant, our VP of Human Resources, one of the last senior women still standing after Adrian's silent purge. We chose a small cafe on the far edge of town, the kind of place where no one from the company would stumble in by accident. Sophia arrived wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around her cup. "He's restructuring HR," she said without preamble. Bringing in his own head of human resources from Medicanova, I've been reassigned to special projects. It's a demotion in everything but title. She slid a USB drive across the table. "I've been documenting everything, every termination, every hiring decision, every time he bypassed protocol. There's a pattern: women first, minorities second, anyone over 53rd, always with perfect legal cover. He's good at this. Too good." I took the drive and slipped it into my purse without looking. "Why give this to me?" I asked. "I'm out, remember?" Sophia gave a bitter laugh. "Because you're the only one he fired who didn't sign the separation agreement immediately. Legal flagged it. He's paranoid about why you're stalling. And honestly, so am I." I smiled faintly, though my stomach churned with quiet rage. "Good, let him wonder." Saturday night stretched into Sunday morning. My apartment turned into a war room. The city outside glittered, but inside my walls, the air was thick with tension. I built a map across my wall using sticky notes and strings of red thread: Adrian's connections, his allies, the executives he had imported, the investors he had been courting. It looked like a spider web, and he was the spider at the center, feeding on what we had built. The phone buzzed again close to midnight. This time, the message was anonymous. "Check your email. A friend." Attached was a video file. It was grainy, shaky, clearly recorded from a distance, but the audio was unmistakable. Adrian laughing over dinner with potential buyers. These engineers, these researchers, they're too focused on saving lives to realize they're sitting on assets worth billions. Once I clear out the idealists, we'll triple profit margins. The Coleman woman, she's the last real obstacle, smart enough to be dangerous, but too ethical to see the knife coming. The sound of laughter followed, sharp and ugly. I replayed it 3 times. By the third, my hands had stopped shaking. He thought I was too ethical to see the knife. What he didn't know was that I had been sharpening my own blade for years. Sunday afternoon, I called Margaret, my attorney. She had been with me through every major decision of my career. If there was anyone I trusted with my life, it was her. "It's time," I said. She was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're sure?" "Yes." "Then I'll have the documents ready. Monday's board meeting will be perfect." Her voice carried no doubt, but I could hear the steel beneath her calm. She knew as well as I did that once we started this, there was no turning back. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. My grandmother's journal lay open on the table. The ink of her words had faded, but the wisdom remained sharp as ever. "Revenge is a dish best served with documentation." I touched the words gently, like a prayer. Adrian believed he was playing chess. What he didn't know was that he had been playing on my board all along. And by Monday morning, when the board convened, he would finally discover who truly owned the game. Monday morning arrived like a storm disguised as calm. The emergency board meeting was set for 9 o'clock, but the tension began hours earlier. You could feel it in the building, in the stiff shoulders of employees clutching their coffees, in the forced brightness of their good mornings. I walked through the lobby as though nothing had changed. No cardboard box in my arms, no tearful farewell. Just me, heels clicking on the marble floor. Security guards gave me a polite nod. They had no idea that technically, according to HR records, I was no longer an employee. That amused me. Upstairs, the executive floor smelled faintly of new leather and freshly polished wood. The offices Adrian had rearranged since his arrival gleamed with sterile perfection. He believed appearances equaled power. Shiny desks, minimalist decor, screens filled with performance metrics that meant nothing outside of PowerPoint. His methods were predictable, almost laughably so, but I kept my expression neutral as I passed him in the corridor. Adrian was surrounded by two of his imported lieutenants, both men in their 30s who had followed him from Medicanova. Their loyalty wasn't earned, it was bought with promotions and promises. Adrian spotted me and slowed, his smile polite but sharp enough to cut. "Vivian," he said, "I didn't expect to see you here. I assumed you'd be busy moving on." I matched his smile with one of my own. "I like to finish what I start." One of his men chuckled under his breath. Adrian raised a hand, silencing him. He leaned closer, his cologne sharp and expensive. "That's admirable, but clinging too long makes it harder, you know? Better to accept the transition gracefully. Everyone admires grace." I tilted my head. Grace is useful, but timing is everything. His eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, then he patted my shoulder the way a king might pat a loyal servant. "That's why you lasted as long as you did." He walked away, the sound of his laughter echoing in the hallway. His lieutenants followed, carrying laptops like weapons. I stayed where I was for a moment, breathing slowly, steadying myself. Adrian thought he had humiliated me. What he didn't know was that I had just marked the precise moment his downfall began. Later that morning, I attended the product development stand-up meeting, something Adrian probably assumed I would avoid. He had already begun replacing staff with his own people, and the atmosphere was heavy with unease. Engineers spoke in clipped sentences, managers avoided eye contact. Fear hung over the room like fog. Adrian entered halfway through, radiating confidence. He interrupted a young engineer mid-sentence and redirected the conversation toward his favorite topic, efficiency. Always efficiency, as though shaving pennies from budgets mattered more than saving lives with the technology we were building. He caught sight of me in the corner and smirked. "I'm glad you're here, Vivian. It's important for the team to see you handling this transition with maturity. Not everyone has your resilience." The words were sugar-coated, but the message was poison. He wanted me small, quiet, defeated. I nodded as though he had paid me a compliment. "I've learned to pick my battles." His smirk deepened. Wise words. When he left the room, the silence he left behind was almost physical. People glanced at me cautiously, waiting to see if I would crumble. I smiled at them, calm and composed. What they couldn't see was the folder in my desk drawer, filled with his own words. Emails where he outlined his plan to clear the old guard. Recordings of Zoom calls where he mocked senior staff, laughing about making the workplace unbearable until they quit. Text messages exchanged with his inner circle, celebrating each departure like trophies. The jewel in my collection was a recording from last week's private dinner with two board members. Adrian's voice was crystal clear. "Vivian Coleman will be gone before Q2. By the time I'm finished, the board will thank me for removing her." I had listened to that recording a dozen times, each one sharpening my resolve. Adrian thought this was his company, but in truth, he was already standing on my ground. Saturday's meeting with Sophia Grant replayed in my mind as I left the office that afternoon. She had looked exhausted, her voice brittle. She told me Adrian had reassigned her entire department and was bringing in his own HR head from Medicanova. "Vivian, I've tracked everything," she said. "Every termination order. Every hiring decision, every deviation from protocol. He targets women, minorities, anyone over 50, always with plausible cover stories." Her hands shook as she slid the USB drive toward me. "There's a pattern. He knows how to cover himself, but he's arrogant. Arrogance leaves traces." I asked why she was giving it to me. "Because you're the only one who hasn't signed the agreement. You're the only one he doesn't understand. That scares him." Her bitter laugh still echoed in my ears. Good, let him be scared. By Sunday evening, my network delivered more intelligence. 3 separate sources confirmed Adrian had been meeting with venture capitalists, shopping Artemis's intellectual property as though it belonged to him. He was packaging our cardiac monitoring system, the crown jewel of our research, for quick sale. But the most damning revelation came from within his own circle. James Callahan, his newly appointed CFO, had developed either a conscience or survival instincts. He sent me an encrypted email containing Adrian's real restructuring plan. Phase 1, eliminate established leadership. Phase 2, restructure operations for acquisition readiness. Phase 3, sell to highest bidder. Phase 4, exit with golden parachute. Estimated personal profit, $40 million. Estimated job losses, 60% of current workforce. The words made my blood run cold. Artemis wasn't just a company. It was nearly 1,000 people and years of research that could save lives. To Adrian, it was nothing but a piggy bank waiting to be smashed. But he had miscalculated. He thought my dismissal would be the end of me. In truth, it had only freed my hands. Sunday night bled into Monday morning, and I barely slept. My desk was covered with folders, USB drives, and hastily written notes. The evidence had grown into something enormous, a living beast sprawled across every surface of my apartment. I stared at the documents until my eyes blurred, then splashed cold water on my face and forced myself to focus. This was no longer about me. Adrian wasn't just firing people. He was dismantling an entire ecosystem of innovation, talent, and hard work. He wanted to burn it down for profit, but I was not going to let him. At 11:47 p.m., another anonymous message landed on my phone. Check your inbox. This time, the attachment was a series of Slack messages from Adrian's private channel with his imported executives. I scrolled through them slowly, each line cutting deeper. Schedule the budget review during her son's recital. Let's see what she prioritizes. Pregnancy announcement, perfect timing. Start documenting every missed deadline. The older women won't fight back. They're too busy worrying about retirement. I closed my eyes, letting the bile settle in my throat. This wasn't strategy. This was predation. Cold, calculated, systematic. I photographed each screen with my backup camera, creating copies of my copies. Redundancy was survival. In corporate warfare, paranoia was another word for preparation. By dawn, my attorney Margaret called. Her voice was sharp, awake, though I could tell she had barely slept either. Vivian, his legal team just reached out, she said. They're offering you an enhanced severance package, 8 figures. I almost laughed. And the conditions? A comprehensive NDA, no board appearance, no future claims, no contact with current employees. I let the silence stretch. So he's trying to buy me off. Yes, he thinks you're motivated by money. Tell him I'll consider it. Ask for the full terms in writing by 8. Margaret hesitated. You're not actually considering this. Of course not, but let him think he's winning. Overconfidence makes people sloppy. When I hung up, I opened my grandmother's journal again. Her words glowed in the dim light of my desk lamp. Power revealed is power diminished. Hold back until the moment matters most. I smiled to myself. Adrian believed he had cornered me. In truth, I was the one tightening the noose around his neck. That morning, as I walked into the building again, the atmosphere was different. People whispered in corners, glancing at me and then quickly looking away. Word had spread that I had not signed the agreement. I was still here, and that unsettled Adrian. At 8:30 a.m., his team circulated the agenda for the emergency board meeting. Item 7, Personnel Optimization Recommendations. I nearly laughed when I read it. He thought he was about to erase me formally, reduce me to a footnote. What he didn't know was that by the time the board reached item 8, he would be the one erased. Inside my office, I unlocked the drawer and pulled out a plain manila folder. It contained everything I had gathered. The damning emails, the recordings, the testimonies. The financial manipulation, the plan for liquidation disguised as transformation. I placed the folder gently into my bag. It felt heavier than it was, as though it carried not just paper but the weight of every voice Adrian had tried to silence. Then I opened my laptop and typed a single message to Margaret. The trigger has been pulled. Prepare everything for delivery. Her reply came instantly. Everything is ready. When do we move? I looked at the clock. Less than an hour remained. At the meeting, I typed 9 sharp. In the moments before I left, I paused by the window. The city stretched out below me, alive with noise and movement. Somewhere down there, people were walking dogs, buying groceries, hurrying to catch trains. They had no idea that in a glass tower above them, a war was about to be fought. I thought of Rachel, crying quietly in the parking garage after her termination. Of Maria, her shoulders bent under humiliation until she could barely look anyone in the eye. Of Sophia handing me that USB drive with trembling fingers. This wasn't just my battle. This was theirs too. Adrian believed he was orchestrating a takeover. What he didn't realize was that the stage was already set, the lights already fixed, the audience waiting for the curtain to fall. And I was holding the script. I arrived at the boardroom 10 minutes before the meeting. The air inside was cold, conditioned to perfection, but my pulse was steady. Adrian stood at the front, rehearsing slides with his lieutenants. His confidence radiated, smug and absolute. He believed the day belonged to him. I took a seat in the corner, silent, unremarkable, a shadow. He barely glanced at me. That was his mistake. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you've already written off. The board meeting had ended for the day, but the echoes lingered in my head long after I stepped out of that sterile glass room. Adrian had strutted through his presentation like a man who already believed he was immortal. He painted charts in bright colors, tossed around words like synergy and optimization, and smiled as though every nod was a victory carved in stone. But I had seen the subtle cracks. A board member's frown, a raised eyebrow, a sideways glance. Adrian didn't notice them, but I did. I made it my business to notice the things others ignored. I left the building quietly, not as an executive, not even as an employee, just as a shadow slipping away into the city evening. Back in my apartment, I opened the old leather journal again. Its pages were yellowed, the ink faded in places, but the weight of it always anchored me. It was more than a keepsake. It was a roadmap. My grandmother's words flowed like whispers across decades. Never let them know how much you own until you are ready to collect. She had written that line after her first corporate battle in the 1960s, when she held controlling shares in a textile company without ever stepping into its boardroom. Men laughed at her back then, dismissing her as a widow playing business. Until the day she stood at a shareholder meeting and voted them all out. I had grown up with those stories. At first, they felt like fairy tales, but as I got older, I realized they were survival manuals disguised as bedtime tales. And I had followed them faithfully. 7 years ago, when Artemis Biotech was choking under debt and on the verge of bankruptcy, I had seen the opportunity. Others saw ruin. I saw rebirth. I was still young, still underestimated, still considered more of a dreamer than a strategist. No one paid attention when I quietly moved funds through a web of trusts. No one noticed when an anonymous investment group appeared just in time to save the company. No one questioned why I smiled at the press conference, clapping politely as the CEO at the time thanked the mysterious investors for their faith. Because who would suspect the quiet woman in the corner, the creative director with ink on her hands from sketching campaign concepts, of being the hidden lifeline? Who would believe that woman had signed the transfer agreements in midnight meetings, wearing the same blazer she wore to staff lunches the next day? The anonymity had been my shield. The silence, my weapon. And now, as Adrian built his empire of lies, that weapon hummed like a blade waiting to be unsheathed. Still, the secret was heavy. I carried it alone, even from those I trusted most. Not even Margaret, my attorney, knew the full truth. She knew I had influence. She did not know the extent. Sometimes, in moments of exhaustion, I wondered if the secret had cost me more than I realized. Relationships strained, friendships questioned, moments of vulnerability denied. Because how could I explain to someone that I was playing a long game, a game where patience was sharper than aggression? But then I remembered Adrian's smirk, his hand pressing on my shoulder, patronizing, his voice dripping with arrogance as he declared me obsolete, and the weight of my secret transformed into fuel. Tuesday afternoon, I returned to the office under the guise of clearing out my things. Security gave me a badge that beeped red instead of green, a sign that my status had already shifted in their system. It didn't matter. I walked through the halls with my head high, ignoring the sideways glances. At my desk, I packed slowly, deliberately, as though each book and each framed photograph deserved a ceremony. But beneath the surface, I was watching, listening. Whispers carried through the air vents and open doors. Adrian had ordered another round of restructuring. Entire teams were being reassigned, their projects buried in bureaucratic fog. Promises of innovation were replaced with deadlines and cuts. People were breaking under the pressure, but too afraid to say it aloud. I placed my grandmother's journal on top of the pile in my box. My hand lingered on its worn cover. A junior engineer walked past, hesitated, then whispered, "We're rooting for you." I looked up, startled. His eyes darted away before I could respond. He disappeared down the hallway, leaving only the echo of his words behind. For the first time in days, I felt the smallest flicker of warmth. I wasn't alone, not entirely. That evening, Sophia called me again. Her voice was tight, urgent. "He's accelerating everything," she said. "The HR changes, the buyout discussions, all of it. He wants signatures from the board before the end of the quarter. If he gets them, it's over." "I have what I need," I told her softly. "Do you?" she pressed. "Because if you don't reveal something soon, people like me are done, will be gone before you make your move." I hesitated. My instinct was always to wait until the perfect moment, but her words reminded me that perfection sometimes came too late. "Trust me," I said at last. "The moment is coming, and when it does, he won't see it coming." She exhaled shakily, as if she wanted to believe me but wasn't sure if she could. After we hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the city lights flickering like stars. My grandmother's words rang in my head again. "Never let them know how much you own until you are ready to collect." I whispered back to the empty room, "Soon." By Wednesday, the office had shifted into a place I barely recognized. The vibrant energy that once defined Artemis was gone, replaced by hushed voices and nervous glances. People avoided conversations in hallways, afraid that walls had ears. Desks sat empty where colleagues used to laugh and argue and dream. Adrian had drained the soul out of the building in less than 60 days. I walked through it like a ghost. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked why I was still here. Fear made everyone blind. In the cafeteria, I saw Michael Turner sitting alone. Once our CFO, he had been forced out months earlier, his resignation painted as voluntary. His tie was gone, his suit wrinkled, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. "You haven't signed," he said quietly. "No. Good, don't. You're the only one who can stop him." His voice shook with conviction, not desperation. He slid a folded paper across the table. Numbers filled the page, ledgers, hidden accounts, discrepancies carefully marked. "I couldn't take everything when I left," Michael whispered, "but I took enough. He's moving money offshore, hiding assets in shell companies tied to Helix Corp. If you connect this with what Sophia gave you, it's enough to bury him." I studied the page. Every figure, every transfer, every signature was a nail waiting for a hammer. "Why give this to me?" I asked. "Because," he said, lowering his voice even more, "the board won't listen to me. I'm just the bitter ex. But you," he paused, "you're different. They'll listen to you, or they will when you decide to speak." I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my bag. "Thank you." He nodded once, as if handing me a weapon had lightened his soul. Walking away, I felt the weight of it pressing against my side. Evidence, proof, ammunition. That night I returned to my apartment and laid everything out again. Sophia's files, Michael's documents, anonymous recordings, Adrian's texts. The wall of red thread was now so dense it looked like a net, and at the center of it, his name glared back at me. But beneath all of it, hidden under folders and papers, was the real secret. The certificates, the signatures. The proof of ownership I had guarded like a sacred relic. I ran my fingers across the embossed seal of Artemis Biotech, the paper smooth under my skin. It reminded me of the night I signed it, 7 years ago, in a quiet room with my grandmother's portrait watching over me. That night I had promised myself I would never reveal it unless absolutely necessary. Power is strongest when invisible, but now the invisible was not enough. Adrian's fire was spreading too fast. I closed my eyes and whispered to the empty room, "Not yet, but soon." Thursday morning, Adrian called an all-hands meeting. He stood at the front of the atrium, surrounded by screens projecting graphs and slogans. His voice was full of rehearsed warmth, selling the dream of Artemis II as if he were unveiling salvation instead of destruction. I stood at the back, arms folded. He didn't acknowledge me. He didn't need to. The performance wasn't for me. It was for the employees who still believed. But I watched his every gesture. The way he spread his hands like a preacher. The way his eyes lingered on certain board members in the crowd. The way he painted cuts as opportunities. And I thought of the papers waiting at home, the secret I carried like a blade. When the applause came, thin and unconvincing, I slipped out before the crowd dispersed. Nobody noticed. That afternoon, I met Sophia again, this time in a parking garage, the kind of place where secrets belong. She looked worse than before, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. "You have to move," she said urgently. "He's accelerating. People are terrified. He's closing departments with no explanation. If we wait, there'll be nothing left to save." I placed a hand on her arm. "I know. Trust me, Sophia, I know." She stared at me for a long moment, as if searching my face for something more than words. "There's something you're not telling me." I held her gaze but said nothing. Finally, she shook her head. "Whatever it is, I hope it's enough." It will be, I thought. It has to be. That night I sat by the window again, the city glowing beneath me, the journal open on my lap. My grandmother's words stared back like a prophecy. One day you will hold the knife, and you will know when to twist it. I closed the book gently. The time was drawing near. Adrian thought he was the puppeteer, pulling strings and making us dance. But he didn't realize there was another stage above his stage, another script written before he arrived, and I was the one holding it. Friday morning arrived with rain. Heavy drops streaked down the tall glass windows of Artemis Biotech, blurring the skyline into something ghostly. The storm outside felt like a reflection of the storm brewing inside these walls. I walked the corridors slowly, listening more than speaking. Fear had silenced people, but fear also loosened lips in private. Whispers reached me in fragments. Entire research projects shelved. Senior engineers resigning overnight. Department budgets slashed. No explanations, only memos. Adrian was consolidating his power with frightening speed. But so was I by mid-afternoon. I found myself in a quiet cafe tucked between office towers, the kind of place where conversations disappeared into the hiss of espresso machines. Across from me sat Sophia, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup as though it were the only warm thing left in her world. "I'm running out of time," she said, her voice cracked on the last word. "He's already sidelined me. One more move and I'll be gone." I leaned forward. "You're not alone. Others feel the same." Michael Turner reached out. He gave me numbers. Records Adrian can't explain away. Her eyes widened. "Michael, after the way they forced him out? He hasn't forgot. And he hasn't forgiven. Neither have I," Sophia exhaled, a shaky sound that carried relief and fear in equal measure. "So we're really doing this. We're fighting him." I nodded once. "Yes, but quietly. For now, we gather, we prepare. And when the time is right, we strike." Her gaze dropped to the table. "And if the time never comes?" "It will," I said firmly. "It always does." Later that evening, I received a message from an unexpected source. A group of engineers who had been working on Project Helios, our most advanced cardiac monitoring system. They asked to meet me in secret. We gathered in the basement of an old library, the air thick with dust and the smell of paper. The youngest among them, a man named Daniel, spoke first. "Adrian ordered us to halt our research," he said. His voice shook with barely contained anger. "Do you know why?" "Because he's planning to sell it to Helix Corp. He doesn't care that this technology could save lives, he only cares about the price tag." Another engineer, Maria, added, "We have prototypes, data, proof of what we built. We don't want to see it buried. We'll give it to you if it means stopping him." Their eyes burned with desperation. I listened carefully, weighing their courage against the risks. Handing me confidential research could end their careers, but it could also save the company. "You're taking a risk," I told them. Daniel straightened his shoulders. "So are you." That was when I realized the truth. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was gathering people. Allies. Soldiers in a war Adrian didn't even know was being waged. I left the library with a hard drive tucked in my bag, its weight heavier than gold. That night, Margaret called again. "You're building an army," she said after I told her about the engineers. "I'm building a case," I corrected. "Call it what you want," she replied. "But armies win wars, and wars leave scars. You sure you're ready for that?" I looked out my window at the city drowned in rain. I've been ready for years. He just doesn't know it yet. By the weekend, the alliance had grown. Sophia in HR, Michael the ex-CFO, Daniel and Maria from engineering, and whispers from others who hadn't stepped forward yet but were watching closely, waiting to see if I could truly challenge Adrian. Each meeting, each conversation, was a piece of a puzzle forming in secret. A network of the disillusioned, the discarded, the silenced. I could feel the energy shifting. For the first time since Adrian's arrival, the fear that had smothered everyone began to crack. In its place, a spark of resistance glimmered. But sparks are dangerous. They attract attention. And Adrian was starting to notice. By Monday morning, Adrian's instincts began to stir. Predators always sense when the forest is shifting. He walked through the building with sharper eyes, glancing into offices, cutting conversations short with his sudden appearances. The easy charm he once displayed had hardened into something watchful. At the weekly leadership huddle, his questions turned into interrogations. He asked Sophia to account for HR protocols she had supposedly misfiled. He demanded to know why finance numbers from 3 quarters ago no longer matched the latest reports. He even asked the engineering department to justify their resource allocation line by line. Each question was delivered with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. I watched quietly, saying little, letting him believe I had already accepted my fate. He thought I was harmless now, a remnant of the old guard who would soon fade into obscurity. But inside, I was taking mental notes, matching each of his maneuvers against the evidence already stacked in my files. Every move he made only tied the noose tighter around his neck. That afternoon, Michael met me in the underground parking garage. He leaned against a pillar, clutching a folder to his chest as if it might vanish if he loosened his grip. "I pulled this from an old contact in compliance," he said, handing it over. "It's an audit trail Adrian buried. It shows transactions to shell corporations linked to Helix Corp. Clean it up, and it's damning." I flipped through the pages quickly. Each line of numbers was another stone in the foundation of my case. When I looked up, Michael's face was pale but determined. "You realize once this surfaces, I'll never work in finance again. You'll be known as the man who stopped Adrian Locke," I said softly. "That's worth more than another CFO title." He gave a tired smile. "I hope you're right." By Tuesday evening, I had gathered my core group in a rented apartment away from downtown. The curtains were drawn, the lights dimmed, the air buzzing with quiet urgency. Sophia sat with her laptop open, spreadsheets glowing on the screen. Daniel and Maria leaned forward, their hard drive connected to my computer, displaying raw data from Project Helios. Michael paced the room, too restless to sit. "We're all here for one reason," I told them. "We want to save Artemis from Adrian's hands, but understand this, once we move, there is no going back. If anyone wants to leave, this is the moment." Silence filled the room, then Daniel said, "We've already lost too much, I'm staying." Maria nodded. Sophia closed her laptop with a firm click. "He's destroyed careers, he won't destroy mine quietly." Michael stopped pacing and finally sat down. "I started this when I dug up the numbers, I'll finish it." I looked around at them, these people bound together by anger and hope, and I felt something ignite inside me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a leader, but Adrian's suspicion grew sharper. On Wednesday, he called me into his office. His smile was wide, his tone warm, but his eyes betrayed him. "Vivian, I hear you've been spending time with some of our less enthusiastic employees. Clearing out your desk seems to be taking a long time." I kept my voice calm. 10 years leaves a lot to pack. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "You've always been clever." "Too clever, maybe. I admire that, but cleverness can be dangerous when it's wasted on lost causes." I met his gaze evenly. "Then it's a good thing I don't believe in lost causes." For a moment, his smile faltered. Then he chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "You'll land on your feet, Vivian. Just make sure you don't stumble on your way out." I left his office with my heart pounding but my stride steady. He was on to me, but he didn't know how much I truly held. Not yet. That evening, I gathered the group again. We reviewed every file, every recording, every document. The case was airtight, but I knew evidence alone wouldn't win. We needed timing, strategy, and spectacle. "Adrian believes he's already won," I told them. "That arrogance is our weapon. We'll let him build his stage, gather his audience, and when the spotlight is brightest, we'll reveal the truth. Not before." Sophia asked, "And what if he moves sooner? What if he forces the sale before we're ready?" "Then we make ready faster," I said. In the quiet that followed, I opened my grandmother's journal. Her words whispered like a compass. "Alliances are forged in shadows, but victories are won in the light." I closed the book and looked at each of them in turn. The shadow alliance is formed. Now we prepare for the light. The city was quieter than usual that Thursday night, or maybe it was just my perception. Every sound felt amplified. The distant wail of a siren, the steady rhythm of rain against glass, the low hum of traffic far below my apartment. I sat at my desk, surrounded by stacks of documents and glowing screens, piecing together the final threads of my case against Adrian Locke. The evidence was overwhelming now. Financial transfers hidden behind layers of shell corporations. Emails dripping with arrogance and contempt. Recordings where he mocked employees like they were pawns in his personal game. And the testimonies of those who had trusted me with their careers. It wasn't just a file anymore. It was a weapon, a blade honed to perfection. But even with the weapon in my hands, a question gnawed at me: when exactly to strike? Timing was everything. Too soon, and Adrian might wriggle out of it, spinning the narrative before the board could react. Too late, and Artemis might already be sold, its heart ripped out for profit. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples, exhaustion pressing down like lead. That was when my phone buzzed. A message from an anonymous number, the same one that had sent me evidence before. "You'll want to see this. Lockhart dinner. Recorded last night." A file followed. I clicked play, and the screen filled with the grainy image of a private dining room. Adrian sat at the head of the table, wine glass in hand, flanked by two men whose faces I recognized from Helix Corp's board. His voice carried clearly, thick with self-satisfaction. Within weeks, Artemis will be gutted. The board doesn't know it yet, but the sale is practically signed. And the employees, they'll thank me for the severance packages when they realize how useless their work really was. As for Vivian Coleman, he laughed, a cruel sound. She thinks she's clever, dragging her feet on signing. By the time she realizes what's happening, she'll be nothing but a memory. The men laughed with him. The video ended. I sat in silence, the fury inside me burning cold and sharp. He had spoken my name. He had reduced me to a footnote in his story, but I was not a footnote, I was the one holding the pen. The next morning, I called Margaret. I have everything, I told her. Everything? She asked, her tone cautious. Emails, documents, recordings, proof of discrimination, fraud, manipulation, and now video of him promising to sell Artemis to Helix Corp. There was a pause, then her voice hardened. That's enough to destroy him. When do you plan to present it? At the board meeting tomorrow, I said. 9 sharp. You realize what this means, she said. Once you do this, there's no going back. You'll expose yourself as the orchestrator. You'll lose the cover you've kept all these years. I know. I glanced at the folder lying on my desk, the certificates inside glowing in my imagination like hidden fire. It's time. That evening, I met the Alliance one last time. We gathered in the same rented apartment, tension buzzing in the air. Sophia sat stiffly, her laptop balanced on her knees. Michael paced again, his face drawn with worry. Daniel and Maria clutched their data drive as though it were a lifeline. I spread the new evidence across the table. This is the final piece. His own words, bragging about selling Artemis. Once the board hears it, there will be no denying what he's done. Sophia leaned forward. And us? What happens to us after? You'll be safe, I promised. I'll make sure of it. The board won't dare retaliate once the truth is public. Michael shook his head. You talk like you already know how this ends. I do, I said quietly, because I've been preparing for it longer than Adrian has been CEO. They exchanged glances, curiosity flickering in their eyes, but I offered no further explanation. Not yet. When the meeting ended, I lingered behind alone. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening like black glass under the streetlights. I stood by the window, staring at my reflection in the dark glass. For a moment, I hardly recognized myself. My face was calm, but beneath the calm lay fire, history, legacy. I thought of my grandmother again. I thought of the promises I had made the night I signed the ownership papers. Protect Artemis. Protect its people. Protect its vision. Tomorrow, that promise would be tested. And tomorrow, I would reveal just enough of the truth to bring Adrian down. The rest could wait. The hours before the storm always feel the heaviest. That night, I returned to my apartment, the city humming outside like a restless beast, and laid everything out one last time. The folders were stacked neatly now, labeled and cross-referenced. The recordings were transferred to multiple drives, hidden in places no one would think to look. Margaret had a complete copy in her possession, and I had backups in cloud servers under encrypted names. Even if Adrian somehow tried to erase me, the truth would survive. Yet certainty did not quiet the doubts. Alone in the silence, I wondered what would happen after. Would the board see me as a savior, or as another power player manipulating them for my own gain? Would the employees understand that everything I had done was to protect them, or would they resent me for staying silent so long? I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The skyline shimmered with light, but I focused on the reflection of my own eyes staring back. For 10 years, I had given my life to Artemis. I had built campaigns, led creative visions, defended projects against executives who only cared about profit margins. And in secret, I had carried an even heavier responsibility, one I had never been able to share. Tomorrow, the secret would begin to surface. Not fully, no, not yet. Timing was still everything, but enough of it would be revealed to shift the balance of power. Adrian would be crushed, and the board would finally look at me not as a dismissed officer, not as a relic of the old guard, but as the force that had kept Artemis alive in the shadows. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Sophia. I can't sleep. Are you sure about tomorrow? I typed back, I'm sure. Rest if you can. You'll need your strength. She didn't reply. I imagined her lying awake, fear and hope twisting inside her chest the way they twisted in mine. Around midnight, I opened my grandmother's journal again. The pages had grown so familiar I could recite some of them from memory, but tonight a single line stood out. A storm does not ask permission to arrive. It comes, and the world rearranges itself in its wake. I traced the words with my fingertip. My grandmother had fought her battles in an era when women in business were ridiculed, dismissed, or silenced. She had survived by outsmarting them, by waiting until the moment when her strike would be undeniable. And I realized I had been carrying her legacy more deeply than I ever admitted. Tomorrow wasn't just my fight. It was hers too. I returned the journal to the drawer and sat at my desk, writing my own notes for the morning. A script of sorts, though I doubted I would follow it word for word. Still, I needed a roadmap. First, I would let Adrian present his vision, allow him to bask in the glow of his fabricated triumph. Then I would introduce the evidence piece by piece, each revelation cutting deeper until even his staunchest allies could no longer defend him. Finally, when the silence was at its sharpest, I would reveal the video, the one where he laughed about selling Artemis and mocked my name. That would be the moment the board would shift. That would be the moment Adrian Locke realized his empire of lies had collapsed. The plan was simple in structure, devastating in execution. But as the hours dragged past, unease returned. Adrian was cunning. He would not go down without a fight. What if he had prepared a counterattack? What if he suspected more than I realized? I thought of his eyes narrowing during our last conversation, the faint crack in his smile. He knew something. Not everything, but something. I told myself it didn't matter. Even if he suspected, the evidence was too strong. No amount of charm or spin could erase the numbers, the recordings, the witnesses. Still, my pulse quickened, imagining him twisting narratives, painting me as the bitter ex-executive with an agenda. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. No, I was not the bitter one. I was the architect, the survivor, the hidden guardian of Artemis. By 3 a.m, exhaustion finally claimed me. I lay down on the couch rather than the bed, as if my body knew sleep would be shallow and fleeting. My dreams were jagged fragments of boardrooms and shadows, my grandmother's voice echoing through them, reminding me again and again that storms do not wait. When I woke, the first rays of dawn were breaking across the skyline. The air felt different, heavy with anticipation. I stood and stretched, my body aching but my resolve sharper than ever. Today was the day. I dressed carefully, choosing the same navy suit I had worn the day I first presented a winning campaign to the Artemis board years ago. A suit that symbolized beginnings. I wanted Adrian to see it when he looked at me across the table. I wanted him to remember that I was not someone who disappeared quietly. I packed the folders into a sleek black case and slipped the smallest hard drive into my jacket pocket. Then I paused, looking around the apartment one last time. The walls covered in red thread, the stacks of notes, the journal resting on the desk. This had been my war room. By tonight, it would either be a monument to victory or a tomb of what might have been. I turned off the lights and closed the door behind me. The night before the storm was over. The storm itself had arrived. The boardroom always smelled faintly of cedar polish and ambition. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, catching the chrome fixtures and turning them into blinding shards. The tables stretched endlessly, lined with leather chairs occupied by men and women who believed they were masters of the universe. Today, they had come to witness Adrian Locke unveil his grand vision for Artemis. I arrived early, my black case resting quietly at my feet. A few board members offered polite nods, nothing more. They had read the headlines, the memos, the carefully crafted narrative Adrian had spun about me. In their eyes, I was already gone, a relic waiting to be brushed aside. Adrian entered minutes later, his navy suit tailored to perfection, his smile radiating confidence. He carried himself like a man who had already won. His lieutenants followed, carrying sleek laptops and whispering in hushed tones. Adrian clasped hands, cracked jokes, kissed cheeks. The room warmed under his charm, but beneath it I felt the steel trap waiting to spring. The chairman cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. Adrian rose smoothly, a conductor about to begin a symphony. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice rich and commanding. "We stand on the brink of a new era for Artemis Biotech, an era of efficiency, of profitability, of unprecedented growth, and I am honored to lead us there." He clicked a button, and the screen behind him lit with graphs and charts. Numbers soared upward in bright colors, projections painted in glossy optimism. He spoke of streamlining, of global partnerships, of bold strategies to maximize shareholder value. Every sentence was polished, rehearsed to perfection. The board leaned forward, captivated. This was the performance they had come for, and Adrian delivered it like a seasoned actor. But I saw the flickers of doubt beneath the surface, small frowns, quick glances exchanged, pens tapping nervously against notepads. He was dazzling them, but not convincing them. Not completely. Half an hour into his speech, Adrian paused for dramatic effect. Of course, change is never easy. It requires sacrifices. Hard choices. Already, we have begun optimizing our workforce, focusing on agility rather than bureaucracy. And yes, some positions have been eliminated, but let me assure you, every decision was made with the long-term vision of Artemis in mind. His eyes flicked toward me then, just for a heartbeat, a flicker of triumph glinting behind his smile. He wanted me to feel the sting, wanted me to see myself lumped into sacrifices. I smiled back, calm and steady. He mistook it for defeat. When Adrian concluded, the room erupted in polite applause. The chairman nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Adrian, that was compelling. Does anyone have questions before we move to the next item?" I stood. The room stilled. Conversations cut off mid-breath. Adrian's smile froze. "Mr. Chairman," I said, my voice even, "before we move on, I have information the board deserves to hear." The chairman shifted uncomfortably. "Vivian, as you know, your employment status." "With respect," I interrupted, "this is not about my employment. This is about the survival of Artemis." Silence. Every eye turned to me. I bent down, lifted the black case, and set it gently on the table. The click of the lock opening echoed through the room like a gunshot. Adrian laughed lightly, the sound brittle. "Vivian, please, this isn't the time for theatrics." "No," I said, meeting his gaze, "but it is the time for truth." I slid the first folder across the table. Inside were emails, Adrian's own words, mocking senior staff, discussing clearing the old guard, targeting women and minorities first. Pages rustled as board members leaned in to read. Murmurs rippled across the table. Next, I placed Michael's documents in front of them. Financial records, audit trails, offshore transfers. The room grew colder. One director's jaw tightened as he scanned the numbers. Another scribbled notes furiously. Adrian's smile faltered. "This is absurd. Out-of-context quotes, fabricated spreadsheets. We all know disgruntled employees will say anything. Then perhaps," I cut in, "you'd like to explain this." I pressed a button on the small remote in my pocket. The screen behind him flickered, and suddenly his own voice filled the room, projected for every ear to hear. "Within weeks, Artemis will be gutted. The board doesn't know it yet, but the sale is practically signed. And the employees. They'll thank me for the severance packages when they realize how useless their work really was. As for Vivian Coleman," laughter followed, sharp and cruel. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Adrian's face drained of color, then flushed with rage. "This is entrapment," he barked. "This is a violation of privacy, an illegal recording." "It's the truth," I said simply. For the first time since his arrival, the board did not look at him. They looked at me. Adrian's mask cracked. His smile vanished, replaced by the sharp lines of fury etched across his face. He slammed his hand against the table, the sound reverberating through the boardroom like thunder. "This is a witch hunt," he snapped. "Do you not see what she's doing? This is revenge, plain and simple. She was dismissed for underperformance, and now she drags you into her bitterness. You're being manipulated." But the board wasn't looking at me with suspicion. They were staring at him, their expressions shifting from confusion to unease to quiet anger. One of the directors, a woman named Helena who had always been cautious, raised her voice. "Adrian, the numbers in these documents, are they accurate?" "They're fabricated," he said quickly, "designed to make me look corrupt." Michael, who had been silent until now, spoke from his seat at the end of the table. "I prepared those numbers. I signed those audits. They're real. And they show exactly what Adrian has been doing behind our backs." Gasps spread across the room. The board members shifted, some leaning forward, others whispering under their breath. Adrian glared at Michael as if he could burn him alive with his eyes. "You're a disgruntled former employee," Adrian sneered. "You lost your position because you couldn't keep up. Now you think you can crawl back and discredit me?" I took a step forward, my voice steady. "Enough. This isn't about grudges. It's about truth. Artemis is not a prize to be sold. It is a company built by people who believed in something bigger than profit. And you," I locked eyes with him, "you never understood that." For a heartbeat, the room was utterly silent, everyone caught between us. Then Adrian laughed, not the charming laugh he used to disarm, but a sharp, ugly sound. "And what do you understand, Vivian? You're a marketer, a storyteller. You think you can run this company with slogans and sentimentality? Artemis needs vision. Artemis needs a leader who knows how to win." I felt the weight of the moment pressing down, the turning point I had been waiting for. My hand hovered over the final folder in the case, the one I had promised myself I would not reveal unless absolutely necessary. The proof of what I truly was. I looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. Doubt shimmered in some, conviction in others. They were teetering. Adrian leaned closer, his voice dropping to a growl only I could hear. You have nothing. All you've done is make noise, and when this is over, I'll bury you so deep no one will even remember your name. I smiled, calm and unshaken. Then it's a good thing names aren't all I have. The chairman cleared his throat nervously. Vivian, do you have more? I slid the final folder onto the table. Yes, Adrian's eyes widened. For the first time, I saw something in them I had never seen before. Fear. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately. The papers inside gleamed white under the fluorescent lights, embossed with seals and signatures. They were ownership certificates dated years back, transfer agreements signed quietly in midnight meetings, documents that proved what no one in this room had ever suspected. 7 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly, when Artemis faced collapse, an anonymous investor stepped in. That investor wasn't a group of strangers. It was me. Through a trust, through silent shares, through structures designed to protect the company until the time was right, I am not just a dismissed employee, I am one of the largest shareholders in Artemis Biotech. The room exploded in murmurs. Chairs scraped, voices overlapped, hands waved for silence. Adrian stared at me as if I had ripped the ground out from beneath his feet. Lies, he hissed. Fabrications. The chairman examined the papers, his brow furrowing deeper with every line he read. Finally, he looked up, his voice grim. These documents appear authentic. Vivian, if this is true, you have withheld information of extraordinary consequence. I withheld it to protect Artemis, I said simply. From predators like him, I never wanted to reveal it, but he left me no choice. The silence that followed was electric. Board members whispered furiously, calculations already racing through their minds. The balance of power had shifted in a single breath. Adrian's face twisted, rage consuming him. You think this makes you powerful? You think this makes you safe? I will tear you apart in the courts, in the press, everywhere. No one defies me and survives. But his words rang hollow now. The spell was broken. His performance had collapsed, and for the first time the board was no longer under his control. I leaned forward, my voice calm and sharp as glass. This isn't about surviving, Adrian, it's about winning, and you've already lost. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a silence of inevitability. The storm had broken, and there was no going back. The boardroom felt different once the storm had passed. The air that had been heavy with Adrian's arrogance now seemed sharp, brittle, charged with aftershocks. No one spoke for a long moment, as if the walls themselves needed to absorb what had just happened. Finally, Helena broke the silence. We need to vote, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hand trembled as she set down her pen. Adrian leapt to his feet. You can't be serious. You'll regret this. She's manipulating you, spinning a story with half-truths and doctored papers. I have given you results, real results, not fairy tales and fabricated numbers. But no one moved to support him. His lieutenants sat rigid, avoiding his gaze, their loyalty crumbling in the face of undeniable evidence. The chairman adjusted his glasses, looking weary. Mr. Locke, you've had your opportunity to present your vision. Now the board must decide whether your leadership serves the best interests of Artemis. Adrian turned toward me, his eyes burning. This is your doing. You think you've won, but you've only made yourself a target. You'll never survive what's coming. I didn't flinch. We'll see. The vote was swift, almost anticlimactic. One by one, hands raised against him. Only 2 abstained, no one voted in his favor. The motion carried. Adrian Locke was removed as CEO of Artemis Biotech effective immediately. For the first time since I had met him, Adrian looked small. His face flushed, his jaw clenched, but the power was gone from his posture. He was just a man now, stripped of the armor of authority. You'll regret this, he spat, gathering his papers with trembling hands. All of you, she can't protect you. No one responded. He stormed out, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt final, like the last page of a book slamming shut. The board turned to me then, dozens of eyes wary and searching. Some carried gratitude, others suspicion, still others fear. Vivian, the chairman said slowly, we have questions. Why now? Why reveal this only when the company was in crisis? I folded my hands on the table, steady and deliberate. Because the company was in danger of being destroyed. Adrian wasn't here to lead. He was here to strip us for parts and sell us to the highest bidder. My silence protected Artemis for years, but silence is useless against a predator like him. Helena leaned forward. And the shares? You're telling us you've been a major stakeholder all along? Yes, I said. Through a trust created years ago. When Artemis faced bankruptcy, I invested quietly to keep the company alive. I never revealed it because I wanted Artemis to grow without politics, without distractions. But now the time for hiding is over. The murmurs swelled again. Some nodded with respect. Others frowned, unsettled by the weight of what I had confessed. The chairman sighed. This changes everything. We'll need to verify these documents, of course, but if what you say is true, then your position here is far more significant than we realized. I met his gaze calmly. Do what you must. I'm not afraid of verification. The meeting ended in fragments. Board members left in small groups, their conversations hushed but urgent. Some offered me brief handshakes, others avoided my eyes. I expected that. Power revealed always unsettled those who had grown comfortable in their illusions. When the room was finally empty, I sat alone at the table, staring at the city beyond the glass. My hands shook now that no one was watching. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only exhaustion and the knowledge that this was far from over. Adrian would not disappear quietly. Men like him never did, but for now, at least, Artemis was safe. Later that evening, I met the Alliance in the same rented apartment where it had all begun. Sophia arrived first, relief etched across her face. He's gone, she asked. Voted out, I confirmed. She let out a shaky laugh, covering her mouth with her hand. I almost didn't believe it could happen. Michael stepped forward. The board believes you now? They believe enough, I said. The documents will be verified, but the tide has already turned. Adrian can't come back from this. Daniel and Maria exchanged glances, their shoulders easing for the first time in weeks. So, we saved Project Helios? Maria asked softly. I smiled faintly. Yes, Helios will live, and so will Artemis. For the first time, the room filled with real laughter. It wasn't loud, but it was genuine, a fragile kind of joy born from survival. But even as I smiled with them, part of me remained elsewhere, calculating. Adrian was out, yes, but he wasn't defeated. Not yet. The true storm was only beginning. News travels fast in the corporate world, faster than markets shift, faster than rumors fade. By the next morning, headlines screamed across business networks. Adrian Locke ousted as CEO of Artemis Biotech. Some outlets painted him as a visionary undone by jealous rivals. Others called him exactly what he was, a predator caught in his own web. Reporters called my phone endlessly, emails poured into my inbox, and messages flooded from contacts I hadn't heard from in years. Most were congratulatory, some were probing, a few were veiled threats wrapped in polite words. I ignored them all. The only voices that mattered were inside the company. Walking through the office that day was unlike anything I had experienced before. People looked up as I passed, not with pity or avoidance, but with something new in their eyes. Curiosity, hope, even admiration. Whispers followed me down the halls, but they no longer felt like knives in the back. They were sparks. Sophia walked beside me, shoulders finally straight after weeks of fear. They know, she murmured. Not everything, I replied, but enough. At the center of the building, where the atrium stretched upward like a cathedral of glass, I stopped and looked around. Employees gathered, hesitant, uncertain if they should approach. I raised my voice, not a speech but a simple truth. Artemis isn't just a company, it's people, it's ideas. It's the belief that we can build something that saves lives. That hasn't changed. That won't change. Adrian is gone, but we remain, and together we'll make sure Artemis thrives. The applause that followed wasn't orchestrated. It wasn't polite. It was real. But outside the building, Adrian wasn't silent. By afternoon, he released a statement through his lawyers, painting himself as the victim of a conspiracy led by a disgruntled former employee who had manipulated the board with stolen information. He threatened lawsuits, hinted at counterclaims, promised to expose the truth. Margaret called me within minutes. He's desperate, she said. That statement has no teeth. He knows it, but he's trying to rattle you. I'm not rattled, I replied, and I was. His threats sounded smaller now, hollow echoes of a man who no longer had a stage. Still, I prepared. Evidence copies were distributed to multiple trusted hands. Sophia ensured HR had airtight documentation of every illegal move he'd made. Michael coordinated with auditors to validate the financials publicly. Daniel and Maria prepared to present Project Helios to the press as a beacon of Artemis's future. Adrian could bark all he wanted. The walls were already closing in. That night, I returned to my apartment, quieter now that the red thread maps had been dismantled, the evidence filed away. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city glitter like 1,000 unspoken stories. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. I thought of my grandmother again, of her words, of her battles. She had fought to be heard in a world that dismissed her, and I had inherited not just her shares but her fire. I imagined her smiling now, proud and fierce. On my desk, her journal lay open to a final line I had read countless times. Legacies are not given, they are claimed. I whispered aloud, I've claimed it. The next morning, the board convened again. This time, the mood was calmer, less combative, but still wary. The chairman cleared his throat. Vivian, in light of your revelations, the board must decide how best to move forward. We will need your cooperation to verify your claims fully. But regardless of technicalities, one thing is clear: Artemis needs leadership it can trust. Eyes turned toward me again. I spoke carefully, each word deliberate. I didn't fight Adrian to seize a title. I fought to protect Artemis. If the board wishes, I will accept whatever role ensures the company's safety. But understand this, I will no longer stand in the shadows. Artemis deserves transparency, and I will provide it. There was a pause, then Helena leaned forward. Perhaps that's exactly what we need. Not another man with promises, but someone who has already proven they'll bleed for this company. A murmur of agreement spread around the table. The tide was shifting again, this time not in whispers but in consensus. When I left the meeting, the sun was high, the city bright. My phone buzzed with messages, but I slipped it into my pocket and kept walking. For once, I didn't need to plan or calculate. The storm had broken, the aftermath had begun, and the path ahead was clear. Adrian Locke would fight his final battles in courtrooms and headlines, but he was finished. Artemis would endure. And I, Vivian Coleman, was no longer just a ghost haunting its halls. I was its heartbeat. As I stepped out into the light, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. The silence of secrecy was gone. In its place was something stronger, louder, undeniable: power. And this time, I would not hide it.